This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Creating really great retail experiences is tough, especially with multiple stores, teams of staff, fulfillment centers, separate workflows. It's a lot. But with Shopify Point of Sale, you can do it all without complexity. Shopify's point of sale system is a unified command center for your retail business. It brings together in-store and online operations, even across 1,000 locations. Imagine being able to guarantee that shopping is just always convenient. Endless aisles, ship to customer, buy online, pickup in store, all made simpler so customers can shop how and where they want, and staff have the tools they need to close the sale every time. And let's face it, acquiring new customers is expensive. With Shopify POS, you can keep existing shoppers coming back to your stores with consistent, tailored experiences and first-party data that give marketing teams a competitive edge. Want more? Check out at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase, and learn how to create the best retail experiences without complexity. Shopify.com/theathletic.
The Athletic.
Another unbearably tense weekend of the 2024 MotoGP title fight ends up with things not that different in the points between Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, but they really could have been several times during the Thai Grand Prix weekend. We had rain, we had penalties and non-penalties, we had crashes and near crashes. We had a lot. Started in qualifying with Jorge Martin crashing, Pecco Bagnaia blowing away the lap record, having his Ducati teammate Andrea Iannone beside him on the grid. Looks great for Bagnaia at that point. Then a Martin lunge in the sprint. Rain on Sunday, a Martin near crash in the second place and the Bagnaia win. And it all ends up with them 17 points apart. I'm losing count. I'm Matt Beard. This is the Race MotoGP Podcast. Simon Patterson is in a hotel room somewhere near Buriram, surrounded by the noise of leery post-podium celebrations from different parts of the MotoGP paddock who are staying in the same hotel. Val Khorounzhiy has none of that going on in his house, but he does look tired. So, Simon, Val, out of all the things that happened this weekend, which do you think is actually the most significant in this ridiculous title battle between Martin and Bagnaia? I'm looking at your thoughtful faces because I've sprung that one on you. I'm going to let Val go first. No, Simon, go on then.
Pecco Bagnaia's win on Sunday.
Ooh.
I think that he needed to reclaim the momentum. He needed to reclaim the initiative, and kind of put Martin in his place a little bit psychologically going into the last two rounds. And he's been talking the talk all weekend, kind of saying, well, yeah, obviously at Phillip Island, that's a Martin circuit, and I knew that I'd be a little bit behind him, but just because he won here last year doesn't mean that this is one of his circuits. This is one of my circuits too. So he kind of needed to back all that up with a win, and he won. So I think that was a fairly substantial move. It at least started to close the points gap a little bit, which he needed to do, and it kind of means that the ball's in his court going into the next two rounds.
Val, are you going to agree with Simon, or does something else stick in your mind as the pivotal moment this weekend?
No, I wouldn't say I agree. I'd say the pivotal moment is everything that didn't happen, as you alluded to in the intro. I think the pivotal moment is we've had two more races and the points lead effectively didn't change. I mean, what did we enter the weekend on? 20, then 22, then 17.
Yeah.
Swings like that will not determine the championship. And I don't think this is recency bias, maybe, but it feels like it hasn't mattered massively. What will matter basically is Martin reaching the checkered flag every time, because I think if he does over the next 4 races, I quite fancy his chances of seeing out the title.
Yeah, I don't think it matters how many points any of them have, as long as they're within touching distance of each other. I think it's just about the gap being small enough that whenever one of them inevitably has a catastrophic failure, the title is decided there and then. Because I still think that is just so close to happening. It was close to happening on Sunday. Martin very, very nearly threw away second place, about a second after Marc Marquez threw away second place. I think he came very close on Saturday to a long lap penalty in the sprint that would have closed the gap substantially. I think, I still think that a mistake rather than it's going to be the non-scores, not the scores, that decide this title with 4 races left.
Yeah, I mean that is my hunch as well. Let's recap a little bit, because there's an important bit of context. Obviously, in Australia, or maybe a little bit earlier, Pecco basically said Phillip Island's for Martin, Mategi's for me, Thailand's for me, Sepang's for me, and Valencia's a crapshoot. I don't think Sepang's for him. That's my my one moment there is, I think it very is weather dependent, but I think if Sepang's dry, if Sepang's conventional-ish, I think Martin could kind of feasibly put it out of reach there. I think that's entirely possible. But with Sepang, you don't really play those games. You don't forecast anything going into the weekend.
Due to the forecast, literally.
Due to the forecast, yeah. And also, honestly, due to the fact that, I mean, this was mano y mano. I mean, obviously, Marc got involved today because it was wet, but I think in the dry, it was a 1-1 weekend. Even though Bastianini won the sprint, so I guess I'm disproving things that I'm saying. But it felt like in terms of ultimate potential, there were 2 guys who were supposed to be fighting out front. Then both races got a little weird. Sepang, I don't know. Maybe in the dry, that's how it should play out. Valencia is just going to be a free-for-all, isn't it? Every time. And whoever gets in there first, there's also a chance that they will be riding like within themselves, riding for the position that they need rather than in their usual positions, like we've seen with, I think, Bagnaia twice already in Valencia. I mean, just title deciders do weird things to riders depending on what results they need to achieve. Yeah, I think the simple part is over, and we're getting into the really, really complicated stuff.
But I wouldn't class this weekend as simple. I don't.
No.
I was about to say I don't remember being as tense watching a MotoGP weekend. That's a lie. It was the end of last season, like the final 3-4 events last season. But that wasn't like this. We had at that point it was Martin chasing most of the time. It still just seemed a little unrealistic that he'd ever actually do it. I've heard that satellite teams don't win championships. More of that later. But this time with Martin just maintaining this points lead somehow all the time, despite whatever crazy things happen. You two are absolutely right. It's down to these constant wince-inducing moments of, are they going to touch at this point when Martin lunges at the first corner of the sprint to make up for something? Are they going to fall when it rains on Sunday and they've got Marquez in the middle of them? It's so nerve-wracking for us watching, let alone being a team in the garage or part of their family or the 2 riders themselves. It's brilliant and crazy and a bit horrible at the same time.
This might be really unfair to Jorge Martin, but if the positions were reversed and Bagnaia was the guy with the lead that Martin has, I'd feel much more comfortable about calling this championship. And I don't know whether or not that's experienced in the last 2 years of Martin not quite getting it over the line whenever he had all the tools to do it or what, but For whatever reason, and that's like a proper gut feeling. I don't really know why I think that way, to be honest, which is not the best analysis of motorsport I've ever given. but yeah, just there's something about it that just makes me think, I don't know. And Sunday's race kind of reinforced that, because it was Bagnaia who was out in front doing that thing that he does where he looks fairly locked in, and it was Martin that was chasing him and being a bit leery about it. And then going back 24 hours, it was Martin who was absolutely on the limit in the sprint whenever he didn't really need to be. And I think maybe that's what it is. We've talked about this before, about Martin has this super aggressive riding style, and whenever he isn't super aggressive, he gets distracted and falls off. So he kind of always has to be super aggressive, and he's got very good at managing it this year, but it generates constant risk, and I think maybe that's why I'm still just not quite confident he's going to get it over the line.
And yet, Bagnaia has 9 Grand Prix weekends. Jorge Martin has 3 Grand Prix. Sorry, Bagnaia has 9 Grand Prix wins. Jorge Martin has 3 Grand Prix wins this year. I haven't calculated every bit of podium, every bit of sprint, every DNF in there, but the person who is currently winning this on consistency is the complete lunatic, which is one of the brilliant paradoxes about this season.
Well, because he's not. Because he's not a complete lunatic. That's just a thing we say, isn't it? There's not that big a chasm between them. There's just a way that they handle themselves in public, which I don't think is necessarily reflective in the result that we get at the end of Sunday. Just, you conflate rider mentality and rider outcome. I don't think a complete lunatic even wins the Moto3 World Championship, for instance. I think you need to have a certain baseline of what you're doing to win out in that particular jungle. I think I understand the Martin psychological thing, but for me it's the fact that Bagnaia already has 1-2, so will not feel the desperation to go for third, and will find it easier to accept that, if it doesn't happen this year, okay, it doesn't happen this year. I have nothing to lose now anymore. I could win the next 4 races and Martin could still win the title. So at this point, I do what I do. Whereas I think hearing Jorge Martin at the end of today's race and just through this weekend, it feels like the championship situation is weighing on him pretty heavily. It feels like, he saw rain on Sunday and he rode a good race after seeing it, but it knocked him off his confidence. It knocked him off his game. He did not want to see it, and it freaked him out a fair bit. And very easily could have ended up with him in the asphalt the way he was riding it.
I don't think there's any world where Martin wins this championship by finishing second in the next 4 races to Bagnaia. I just don't see it. I think there's just, and that's not a slight in either of them. I think there's just too many wild cards and jokers and unusual circumstances like Sepang weather or Valencia weather that can mix into it, that I just can't see the two of them doing that.
I think over any distance that we're taking right now, I mean, in a Grand Prix distance, it's 1 of 4. For me, it's just if it's dry, if it's wet, well, obviously everything goes out the window. If it's half wet, because if it's normal wet like it was today in Thailand, actually, if you look at the pecking order, it's basically a dry race, isn't it? I mean, the gaps were a bit smaller, but when
KTM,
yeah, but when it's full wet in MotoGP, it's closer to dry than mixed weather is. Mixed weather is an entirely different category. Full wet is basically, you kind of get a conventional race in terms of performances. And I think we saw a very conventional race today from most everyone. Over a full distance, I think maybe in the sprint, you could see a Pedro Acosta or a Brad Binder getting involved. Over a full distance, it's 4 people. And the question there is how much those 4 people can get involved, really. For me, the reason I don't think Martin will finish second in the 4 remaining races is I'd be stunned if he doesn't win one of the remaining sprints.
Yeah.
That's what I'm expecting. I think it's not comfortable. We had seasons where just finishing second, like in motor racing, you can think of some examples. It's going to be Formula 1 because that's what we do sometimes here. But Nico Rosberg won his world title by finishing second a bunch in the best car on the grid. Jorge Martin has the best bike on the grid, but there's not 2 of them. There's 4, and 3 of those 4 are up top all the time, and then a year-old bike is also up top all the time. You can't bank on it. You can't do it. It even hasn't worked out that way in the women's championship, which concluded recently. You'd think that was a 2-horse race, and then you can just finish second every time if you need to, but it was in the end much closer, much more chaotic than that. That just feels like that's how it works. I don't expect 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. But then again, I've been saying that so much, so now it kind of has to happen.
Well, yeah, but even when it is 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, they're finding ways to make the route to that 1-2 complete chaos most of the time.
Yes.
And having other people get in the middle of it. The Buriram Sunday race was not a straightforward 1-2 for Bagnaia and Martin in any way. I'm going to rewind to Saturday briefly. The Race Members Club get involved in this podcast to a brilliant degree, sending in questions for us to answer and argue about. If you want to be part of that process, come find us on Patreon, look for the race there, or go to the-race.com/members-club. If you just want the bikes, there is the Riders tier on Patreon where we just talk about this fun stuff. There is some F1 as well if you want it, if you're that sort of person. But immediately after the sprint finish on Saturday, there was a little flurry of questions on Patreon. Northern Bastard summed it up best by saying, "What size T-shirt is Simon?" Very personal question. "I'd like to order him a Satellite Bikes Can't Win Championships one to wear at Valencia." Ian Farrell much more innocently said, "Can satellite teams win championships?" after the sprint. And then after the Grand Prix, followed that up with, "This aged badly." We are at a point where Martin's going into these last two races with the championship lead, a decent-sized one. Simon, you have said on this podcast for a long time satellite teams can't win championship. He is still riding for Pramac. This is doable now, isn't it? And if it's not doable, it's going to be because he does something stereotypically Martin, surely, not because he's on an independent bike at this point.
I mean, whichever one of these two doesn't win, it'll be because they've been idiots this season. That's essentially what it's going to come down to, right? Because they've both done really stupid things. I think Pecco Bagnaia will probably point the finger at other people doing stupid things to him, because both Marc and Alex Marquez have managed to cost him 30 or 40 points that would have put him in a much more comfortable position. But he's done a fair share of crashing on his own as well. They've all thrown the bike down the road under no pressure at various points this season. We briefly thought for a while that Moto2 was the championship that no one wanted to win this year, and then Ayagura won it, and MotoGP took over from it, where they both just keep doing silly things. So I'm obviously not going to outright say that what sort of bike might be able to win the championship, but I mean, yeah, it's possible. Of course it is. It has to be. It so obviously is. But it's a unique set of circumstances created by two guys that can't stay on the bike, and Ducati flooding the grid with incredible machinery that finished 1st to 8th in Saturday's sprint.
Yeah. I certainly think if a satellite team does take a ride to the championship this year, given the way things are about to change for next season, we won't be seeing that for a little while. Certainly, at least not with the current kind of pecking order of which manufacturers are on top. There were a few questions about Pecco Bagnaia's mentality. I mean, these came in after the sprint, and obviously he had that important win on Sunday, but I think it's worth addressing. So Sean, after the sprint, said, "Why does Pecco go all passive-aggressive when he doesn't perform as well as his rivals? He blames tyres, he blames stewards, everyone but himself. I think he's better than that and could be a bit more gracious in defeat." Miguel Casado of Alvaro said, "Seeing Bagnaia talk about Jorge Martin touching the green," we'll get into that a little bit later, by the way, "and his incident with Alex Marquez, is he way more nervous than he appears to be, or that he wants us to believe?" And Oscar Robledo brought in the Marquez looming presence, and again, we'll have a bit of a Marquez chat later, but he wondered, which do you think of Martin and Bagnaia are better equipped to deal with the disruption that Marquez can cause? So Bagnaia, how he's handling being behind, how he's handling the defeats he's getting. Simon, I think you're the kind of main proponent of Bagnaia's mental strength on this podcast, but as the Members Club are saying, it looks wobbly now.
I don't even think it's mental strength. I think I'm much more cynical than that. I think that Pecco is an articulate, well-spoken person who talks in great detail about what he sees, and then the people that organise the championship cut that into sound bites, throw it to Jorge Martin as a controversial question, and try to generate a rivalry where there is none. Dorna are responsible for making Pecco look really bad this year by trying to create a rivalry. And that is exactly what we saw with the thing about the Martin going in the green in Saturday, to the extent that this has gone a little bit unnoticed. Dorna posted a video on a series of videos on their YouTube channel. One was Bagnaia saying that he had saw Jorge on the green, he thought 4 times. In reality, he said maybe it was 4 times, but I obviously wasn't the censors, and that's just what I saw with my own eyes, and I could be absolutely wrong, and whatever the stewards say is right, which didn't make it into the edit. They then asked Martin about it, and he was kind of slightly confused, but also a little bit bullish self about it. There was a third video in that sequence that was posted to social media that showed Martin touching the green that Dorna then deleted from their own post, presumably because someone at Ducati went, "What the hell are you doing with this?" They're trying to generate a rivalry that doesn't exist, plain and simple. And Pecco Bagnaia is not a moaner. He's not complaining. We spend a lot more time with these guys than the TV cameras do in a much more relaxed setting of the media scrums. And like what I see the championship posting on social media is not reflective of the guy that I see sitting in front of me.
We hadn't discussed this pre-episode, but I also was distinctly unimpressed by the 4 times, 8 times, whatever, how many times he touched the green, because it's not the first time this season that there's been an effort to make a heated rivalry where there isn't one. And I don't like that very much, but part of the responsibility is also on the general public, and the way I would put it is, Bagnaia lands himself in hot water a lot over things he says. I'd like a lot of people to just, remember this as a rule. He just likes to chat. The guy just likes to talk. For some reason, maybe this is a relic of Valentino Rossi, a relic of Marc Marquez, a relic of whatever. Maybe it's just the way we consume sports right now. Everything has to be mind games. Everything has to be a statement. Everything has to be somebody dobbing somebody in. Sometimes people just like to chat. Pecco Bagnaia, part of it is the sportsman. When he talks about tires, I think he's so used to his Ducati machine being, absolutely bulletproof and the strongest and feeling in the zone that whenever something's wrong, he reaches for an explanation. That you can find that a little annoying, but that's a sportsman thing. Like, show me a champion, I'll show you a champion who does exactly that to a greater or a lesser extent. Otherwise, it's just chatting. It's just feeling like you can answer a question that's been put to you. It's the same thing as with the bigger gap between works bikes and satellite bikes last year when he said that. A lot of people found that he's just trying to make the championship easier for himself, when it's clearly just a guy pontificating. They have thoughts on the championship.
Yeah, that was a particular thought experiment that Bagnaia needed to stop about 5 words and then go, that's not going to come across well. But it wasn't meant in the way that he said it at all, was it?
I don't think he needed to stop it. I think it's not fair. Even if you disagree, even if you see ulterior motives, sometimes these guys just should be able to be wrong about unimportant stuff like this, right? Without it being a big deal. I'm wrong all the goddamn time. So, I would like other people to have that luxury too.
And this is it's almost another part of the legacy of Valentino Rossi, in a positive way. The VR46 guys are students of the sport in a way that not everyone in the MotoGP grid are. And they like to be able to explain why things have happened. Luca Marini is a master at it. We're going to have Luca on the podcast in a few weeks. I've already recorded it. And it's glorious because it's Luca explaining what he sees in MotoGP. He's brilliant at it. But all the VR46 guys have an element of that to it because that's what Valentino Rossi was like. And I genuinely, I think that's part of his, I don't want to call it a problem, but he wants to tell you how he sees things because he likes to talk and he understands all the nuance and he likes getting it across. And actually, he speaks really, really good English, which is something that is very important to remember in the context here because they all speak English. But the reason that Enea Bastianini isn't getting himself into trouble for these situations is because his English isn't good enough to. Not because he doesn't do nuance very well because his English isn't fantastic. So he can't kind of try to explain complicated situations and then discover he's in trouble because it's been misunderstood. And I think Jorge Martin just doesn't like talking to the media. I think he's pretty open about that. He doesn't really enjoy it, so he doesn't do very much of it. And maybe that's Pecco's fault. I don't think it's a fault. I think it's a strength because it makes him a much more human character, and it's very useful for us as journalists because it helps you understand things. But I I keep coming back to this being an artificial invented crisis.
I have to say as well, like I genuinely don't think before Pecco Bagnaia versus Jorge Martin, a title battle could be this enjoyable without a bit more needle between the protagonists. I'm not saying I want people crashing into each other all the time, but sporting rivalry with a bit of spice to it generally needs a little bit of snideness. A few of those Rossi mind games. These two get on well, respect each other, give us brilliant racing. Maybe it's because they do enough crazy things that you're always on the edge waiting for something crazy to happen, but it's great fun, even though it's really civilized between them as well. Which just seems a good time to throw in Marc Marquez. Oscar Robledo's question about which of these two is likely to deal best or worst with Marquez being among them in these crucial races. I mean, my take on this is, Simon mentioned it in our work chat as the race was unfolding today. I didn't feel Marquez was racing Bagnaia particularly naturally in the Grand Prix. I feel like Marquez was racing Bagnaia like someone who was thinking, if I wipe this guy out, this is genuinely going to be quite a hassle for me to untangle and sort coming into his team next year. I need to not take a risk that will take him out. And I don't think that's necessarily caused Marquez to then crash because he wasn't riding in the way that felt natural. But this didn't feel like an instinctive Marquez going for the lead in a damp race. It felt like a cautious one, to me at least.
Martin versus Marquez in the same garage would be Rossi Lorenzo wall in the middle of it, because that's their personalities.
Yeah, maybe.
It is. It's just their personalities. Pecco isn't the sort of person, I think, to really be like that. Whereas I think Martin is. I think Martin thrives off it, which is quite cool, actually. I quite like that he's that kind of aggressive little bull, and that's what works for him. But I don't think Pecco is that type. I've had a pretty significant falling out with Pecco over some of my reporting that he didn't like, and we're completely civil and get on really well, and he comes and talks to me, and there is no bad feelings at all about it, because he kind of got over it and realized, I think, that I was doing my job. I think that even if Marc Marquez knocks him off, he'll bring that same attitude of racing is racing. It might take a while, it might not happen that weekend, but him and Marc are fairly civil right now, and you could argue, if you were Pecco, that Marc is the reason why he's behind in the championship, because of the crash at Portimao.
Pecco's picked a different Marquez for that reason.
Yeah, he's picked a different Marquez brother to throw that at. But I think part of the reason for that is that Alex Marquez isn't his teammate next year, and he's smart enough to know that you don't really need enemies.
I also suspect he should know that if you go after Alex, you go after Marc anyway, I would imagine. I think, it's obviously Pecco needs Marc to be involved right now. It's as simple math suggests that right now it would be beneficial for Pecco. And in fact, the way he spoke after the race, when he described Marc going down behind him, it was almost like a tinge of regret, because I wanted to finish 1, 2, 3.
Oh, it wasn't even a tinge of regret, because I asked him about it at the press conference, and he was straight up like, damn. Whenever he told me that was like his thought, whenever it happened, he was like, well, there goes 4 points.
Yeah. But I think, yes, Marc, I think, was a bit riding in himself. I do also genuinely believe, and maybe this is baseless, but I do genuinely believe that at this point in the season, Jorge Martin in those conditions would get similar treatment. That is my feeling. I don't think Marc is trying to be kingmaker necessarily.
Yeah.
I think he is just trying to maximize his end of season.
I think he's trying to win races while staying out of the title battle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots of people around Italy will agree that is a very Marquez thing to do.
The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Okay, well, we're in nice, non-controversial territory. More from the Members Club. Angelina says, Simon's favourite topic, stewards' decisions this weekend, and just leaves a question mark hanging in there with brackets around Franco Morbidelli, Fermin Eldiger and Marc Marquez. And we'll get into quite a few things here because it was an interesting weekend for penalties and non-penalties. I think we should start with the most straightforward one, which was Franco Morbidelli taking out his former teammate, Fabio Quartararo, who was having a brilliant weekend on the still not very competitive Yamaha. Even like he might nearly lead in the Grand Prix at one point off the line. Todd Bryant says, are we expecting a significant improvement in race direction once Salman Crafar steps in next year? Absolute shambles this weekend. Morbidelli getting a single long lap penalty for an absolutely ridiculous move that left Fabio on the ground. It beggars belief. Paul McClenaghan says, absolutely disgraceful decision against Morbidelli wiping out Fabio. Yet again, race directions show they're useless in Paul's eyes. Frankie has form for this behaviour. He should have been black flagged. So we'll get into long laps, Marquez and other stuff in a second. Let's do the Morbidelli thing first. Simon, your reaction in our work chat was quite blunt when Morbidelli barged Quartararo onto the ground. I mean, I'm just going to throw in quickly. Ducati won the team's title today. Pramac won it last year. Why has Pramac not won it this year? Because they replaced Johan Zarco with someone who rides like no other bike is on the track, I think, is a big part of that, in my opinion. And I love Morbidelli as a personality, and I think he was a great rider in 2020, but how many times does this have to happen? Anyway, that's my rant. Simon, have yours.
Well, the one thing I will say, if you think that Paul McClanahan's message to on our Patreon is quite severe, you want to see what he said in the group chat that we have, because he's a friend of mine, and it was much worse. So that's actually quite tame. The only reason why I can justify the penalty that Franco Morbidelli got is because the stewards seem to think that every incident that happens in motorbike racing at the minute happens in its own bubble without any relationship to any other incident, because Franco Morbidelli is a repeat offender, and if he had acted the way he has acted across the course of this season in an era like 2015, whenever we still had penalty points, he'd be looking at a race ban. I'm pretty sure of that at this point, because he just keeps doing stupid stuff over and over again. The pass on Quartararo was never going to work. And then if you go back and watch it, although the cameras kind of focus on Fabio in the gravel, he then does the exact same thing to Jack Miller in the next corner. Only Miller stays on.
Oh wow!
Like he's just. You're right, Matt. It's like there's no one else on the track with him sometimes, and I don't understand it at all, because he's such a nice human. Yeah. But it's like whenever the visor closes, he just turns into a totally different person, and a dangerous one. I would have been happy to see him black flagged out of the race on Sunday. I don't think that a long lap penalty for a repeat offender teaches them anything, especially in a wet race where you can basically recover into a pretty good position, because Frankie was in a pretty good position whenever he then crashed out. You know, he was already back into like P8 when he crashed, which is okay. So it's not an adequate punishment for ending someone else's race, and I don't understand what the stewards were doing. I really don't, because it should have been so much more severe. And to pick up on Todd's point, I think we are going to see things changing next year. I think Simon Crafar is going to bring a bit more common sense to how things operate. I think there'll be a bit more let them race, and then so basically riders will be allowed to race and contact will be okay to a point where it's not okay, and that point's going to be quite clearly defined. And then once you cross that, you're going to get hammered a bit, and Frankie was over the line and deserved to be hammered a bit.
I don't want to get into particularly finicky, audience irritating territory, but we do need to talk about how track limits were penalised / not penalised in the sprint, because we did have a few questions on that. Todd Bryant mentioned it as well. He referenced Martin. He described it as Martin going unpunished, repeating Brad Binder's 2023 mistake. Was this where Brad got the same penalty twice? Was that Assen? Can't remember. Anyway, Brad Binder and track limits that was Assen, wasn't it? Yeah, Brad Binder and track limits was not a great relationship last year. Mike Falcone says, if Martin had done that pass on Pecco that ran him onto the green in a four-wheeled sport that should not be named, would it have held up, or would he have to give it back? The man who straddles 2 and 4 wheels like a 3-wheeled journalist, Val, you can lead on this one. How would F1 have handled the... Actually, just in case someone didn't see the sprint, just kind of quickly recap what we're talking about here with Martin going over track limits a mystery number of times, but not getting a penalty.
Jorge Martin had 2 track limits breaches in the sprint, but he also had like a million. He had 2 that counted because of how MotoGP does track limits. And one of those 2 that counted was at turn 7. The other one was also at turn 7, but this one was in overtaking Pecco Bagnaia and sort of squaring off the corner, getting on the throttle, you know, doing the line that you need to do to keep that position. He basically went off the outside curb. I don't think you want to look at F1 in the way things are officiated necessarily, I guess. But yeah, you give the position back if that happens in F1. And for me, that's completely right. For me, an overtake is a legal overtake when it's legally completed within the confines of the track. And also, ideally, the other rider also stays on the track unless they did something unreasonable to try to keep position. At the same time, Enea Bastianini won at Misano by going off the track, looking over his shoulder at whether or not he took down Jorge Martin. I'm not horrified that Martin didn't have to give the position back to Bagnaia here. The move to begin with was good. I think if the guidelines existed that you definitely cannot breach track limits there while completing a move, then he would have stayed within track limits. I think he had the capacity to do that. MotoGP does not require you to do that in that corner. The blue paint might as well be whatever. Look, the wider issue is, and I don't even know how much it bothers me necessarily, but we have one color that's no-go, and we have the other color that's okay. And on some corners it's no-go, and some corners it's okay. Clearly that confuses the audience. I mean, that's obvious to me. It leaves people confused. I can live with it, but it's probably not the ideal solution, right? I mean, we can think of something more elegant than this, probably.
I mean, there is a more elegant solution. The reason that some of the corners are blue and some of them are green is because the corners of the blue paint have the new Misano curbs, which are super aggressive and bumpy whenever you go right out to the edge of them. So they're designed so that the curb punishes you for going over track limits so that the stewards don't have to. So the solution is put those curbs everywhere. And circuits are trying to do that. The reason that there was 3 places this year that were green last year but blue this year is because they were putting in those curbs. So just make it mandatory that you have to use those curbs, and then it's problem solved.
Yeah, I hate coming across as like a grumpy middle-aged purist about anything, because it's not generally my stance on any part of life, really. But with track limits, with a move like Martin's, if that had resulted in a penalty that could be so decisive in a title fight, I'm squinting at the screen trying to see how it's a problem. how what he did there really was unfair or matters in any significant sense. I just don't care about track limits. I hate the fact they can decide so much.
It's so much less of an issue than Bastianini's pass on him, which took 5 points off him in Misano.
Yeah.
You know, or my favorite quote of the day, I think, was newly crowned Moto2 world champion Ayogura, who put a very aggressive pass on Darren Binder, trying to get into the podium fight in the Moto2 race, and then told us afterwards, it's okay, I went past him, we touched, I looked at the big screen, he was still on the bike, I thought, no penalty.
Which, by the way, that no call, because it was placed under investigation, right, immediately ruled fine. I mean, they couldn't have penalized him when they let Morbidelli go, basically. Oh, not Morbidelli, sorry, Bastianini at Misano. I guess that's let him race. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I particularly like it, but okay, I can live with it, I guess. But it's not really not a huge fan necessarily. For instance, how is it different to what Marc did to Mir today? Anyway, that's different corner profiles, different corners. Let's not.
Well, no, let's get exactly into this. This is Marc Marquez penalty corner now, because. Listeners, I think we need Val or Simon, who are volunteers, to explain Marc Marquez's race, penalties, leathers, and jump up and down the timing screen at the end between 11th and 12th. Val put his hand up first. What actually happened?
Well, I'll leave the leathers bit for Simon, because I think that's become a bit of his niche in MotoGP reporting.
I wish it wasn't.
In recent times, let's go on the penalty, because it's just a very funny situation. It's a very funny thing, except for Joan Mir, it's not funny at all. So Marc crashed, as he tends to do in wet races. I genuinely, watching that race, I don't know if I was alone on this, but I said to myself, I should have said it in chat so you guys could have backed me up. In fact, if you can pretend that I said it, because the audience doesn't know, so that would be good. I was like, he either wins or he's on the ground. There's no other outcome today. And in the end, he was on the ground. He picked up the bike. It was a little bit damaged. The rear brake didn't work. He went about the usual thing of, being much faster than the riders ahead of him and just elbowing them out the way, in best Argentina 2018 fashion. It's classic. One of those guys in the way was Joan Mir. So the angle that we have of the Mir overtake, I actually don't know if it was unfair or not. The camera shot's not great. I genuinely didn't get a good look. And
it's worth noting that Marc Marquez actually said in his debrief, I don't know what angle they showed you, but one of them is going to make me look really bad and one of them's not.
Yeah, and I think the corner angle is the one they had, and it's the one that makes him look a lot worse. But he did move him out of the way. And that's for me, that's fine as a drop one position penalty. But ideally, when you have the drop one position penalty, it's supposed to be, what would you call, restorative justice, I guess, right? So you just move back behind the guy that you just did that to. By the time it was issued, Marc was already pedaling after. Well, obviously, Mir was already not behind him because Mir had been sent to the Shadow Realm. So Marc was already pedaling up the road. I don't know the exact timing, but it sure looks like he got notice of the penalty, saw Taka Nakagami up ahead, went, okay, I'll overtake him for like half a second. I'll let him back past, then I'll overtake him again. And it's a little hard to recreate the exact sequence of events going from the footage that is available, but the parts I am sure of is Marquez overtakes Nakagami at some moment, and maybe the couple of corners before or right before. He waves him past at turn 3, then he blasts out of turn 3 and gets him back before turn 4 is even here. That's legal. I don't think that's in the spirit of the rules. It was so quick. It didn't show up on the timing. Race control did not know he had done it. Race control moved him one place back at the finish. Then presumably somebody at Gresini went, no, hey, here's footage. Here's what he did. And they went, okay. Or he restored him to 11th. So, justice.
So, two things on this before we go on further. Firstly, from what I understand, from what I've been told tonight, there are a group of riders who have been lobbying extensively for years within Safety Commission that if you have to drop one position, it's behind the guy you basically, that you penalised.
Yeah.
and no one will listen to them within race control. But there is a group of riders who've been pushing for this, led by some of the more sensible, not led by some of the reactionaries that you'd maybe expect, led by some of the more mature heads in on the grid. That's what at least some of the riders want, because they see what Marc did as essentially gaming the system a little bit. The other thing is then with the timing of the penalty, and this is on race control as much as it's on the stewards, but it is absolute amateur hour that they issued a penalty and then didn't watch the guy they'd penalised to make sure that he served the penalty. And the way that they handled it after the race was demoting him one place in the timing screen, putting it up on the screen that they demoted him one place, and then whenever no one was looking after the graphics that went out on TV, moving him back on our timing screens into P11, issuing the results with him in P11, and then notifying the media only whenever we questioned it in the WhatsApp group chat that we have for this, and being like, oh yeah, we reviewed the video evidence, he's 11th. That is not good enough. That is like amateur hour stuff. It's clown school. You can't penalise someone and then unpenalise them and then not tell anyone. What were they doing? Yeah. So that's actually my biggest shooting gripe of the day. Yeah. Even more than Morbidelli, now that I think about it.
For what it's worth, I think I quite like that solution of moving. I think the rider should have the option of either moving behind the rider that he screwed or going into the long lap, I guess. I mean, it has to be... Because sometimes, again, maybe you've banished them so hard into the runoff that they're 20th now, and maybe you don't want riders riding around looking over their shoulder trying to figure out, which one of these guys am I supposed to let through?
Yeah, do you think Morbidelli knows who he hits?
Potentially. I mean, he did, for what it's worth, Franco...
Which one of the people he hit?
Franco did apologize-ish after the race, I guess. I mean,
yeah, he also kind of blamed Fabio, though.
But he said Fabio
while apologizing.
Early. Yeah, it was... I don't know. I didn't stick up in his defense a few minutes ago because I wasn't really feeling it, and I'm still not really feeling it. So let's move on.
I'd break a bit earlier than Franco if I was in a Yamaha as well, to be fair.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, completely. A Yamaha should
Franco
be breaking earlier than the Ducati GP24.
Franco spared me the blushes of a good Yamaha result.
Marquez's leathers, Simon. What was going on there?
Yeah, Marquez's Alpine Stars leathers opened, which is something that we've seen happen before. And it's bizarre in that Alpine Stars really don't know why this keeps happening, and they keep trying so hard to stop it from happening. Seems like whenever you watch back at Marc at an onboard camera facing him, he goes off the airbag, he crashes, the airbag inflates. The theory from speaking to some people at Alpine Stars is that the problem was that Marc lifted his own bike, and maybe in doing so has kind of stretched his chest while the airbag was inflated. So while the suit was already under pressure, he then stretched it further. That's pulled the Velcro a little bit loose. And whenever he got back on, the wind caught it. You watch the onboard, literally, as soon as he gives it a handful of gas, it just goes zip and it's open. And then he said it only got really bad on the slowing down lap. It got really bad right away. And if only there was a group of people with access to lots of cameras who should be watching Marc Marquez to see what he's doing during a race that would have noticed something like this. But race control completely missed it. And it should have been a penalty. He should have been given a dash message to tell him that his suit was undone, which would have then given him either the choice of stopping and fixing it like Jorge Martin did in India last year, or being black flagged out of the race because he wasn't wearing his proper safety equipment. And that didn't happen because apparently race control were asleep or something. Obviously the same guy who's responsible for making sure their leathers are closed is the guy who's responsible for making sure that Marc Marquez has dropped one position.
He was busy. He was ill today. I was really surprised by the sequence of events, and I think, Simon, you were too. I mean, I went to the Marquez onboard to figure out when he dropped the position because we weren't aware of what exactly went on there. And I was like, oh, his suit's open. Oh, it's been open for laps and laps and laps. Cool. So just an hour of revelations today. A lot of learning.
Yeah. mainly focused around Marc Marquez.
Yeah. Again.
It's like he's on a mission to make race control look pretty bad today, actually.
Marc Marquez is just on a mission to do something eventful and has been for a long time.
He is drama.
And that bodes really, really well for next year when we don't have the Martin versus Bagnaia title fight anymore. Well, we're in... This isn't quite stewarding territory, but it was strange. Rewind right back to start of Friday. Dan Neal says, can you briefly talk about the incident between Tony Arbolino and Zonta van der Gerberg in Moto2 practice? I'm really confused how that happened. I agree, Dan, because I switched on for MotoGP practice just to see replays of this unfolding. What happened, Simon? And I imagine a lot of listeners haven't even seen this, but it's bizarre. It deserves explanation.
So, first of all, pit lane here is really weird. The pit lane entrance is at turn 11 and runs the entire length of the back straight and is basically half a kilometre long. But the actual part where the pit lane speed limit kicks in is like at meter 450 of that 500 meters. So there's this big long strip of track that is technically pit lane, but it's live track that the riders come in to get into the pits. They used to come into the pits on the exit of turn 12, and it was just so insanely dangerous that we stopped doing that for obvious reasons. So Arbolino crashed going through turn 11, slid across the track, slid across the strip of asphalt that is the entry into pit lane, and ended up in the gravel. He then picked his bike up, spent literally 4 or 5 minutes faffing around in the gravel, trying to get it restarted while the marshals told him to get off the track, which in itself should have been a penalty because you're jeopardizing marshals, right? You're in a spot where you've just landed after you crashed, and now you're expecting these guys to come out and work for you and ignore what they're telling you for your own good while you try and restart your bike to ride the 250 meters to pit lane that you could have just pushed it at this point into. So he's doing that. He gets back on his bike. They bump start the bike and he stalls it. So he's now stuck in pit lane, but in the better part of pit lane that is still very fast with a stopped bike. A marshal runs to help him restart. Zonta van der Gerberg comes into pit lane, sees Arbolino, sees the marshal, gets absolute target fixation and rides into the back of a stopped Tony Arbolino and nearly snaps his ankle off.
While trying to miss the marshal, essentially.
While trying to miss the marshal, but with 2.5 meters of space on the right-hand side that he could have rode through. Van der Gerberg got a very well-deserved pit lane start that, in my opinion, should have been a race ban. Tony Arbolino got a very lucky 3-place grid penalty that should have been the pit lane start that Zonta van der Gerberg got because they're all idiots that briefly switched off their brains and jeopardized a load of marshal safety in the process. I've always been on this thing about if you crash, you shouldn't be allowed to rejoin. Marc Marquez then proved that, to go back to Marc Marquez, then proved that on Sunday by blaming the fact that he had no rear brake after his crash. And that's what caused a part of the reason why he rode into Joan Mir. Fabio Quartararo also did the race on Sunday with no rear brake after remounting whenever Franco Morbidelli rode into him. So you've got two guys wobbling around for 12th place with barely functional bikes. It achieves nothing. It's dangerous. Just stop them from getting back on the bike. And Van der Gerberg and Arbolino got quite lucky with the stewards not being anywhere near as strict as they should have been.
Simon, that was glorious. Dan, your question has been answered. I feel like that was worth the Patreon subscription just to get that glorious description. Speaking of things worth Patreon subscription, we owe you a lot of MotoGP Extra podcasts members. This is going to be an exciting winter. Simon has been on an absolute mission gathering one-on-one interviews with riders over the last few weeks, and I've listened to all of them so far. I put a day aside to go through them, and Simon, great questions, lovely relationships you have, but also we've got a great bunch of thinkers and talkers in MotoGP right now.
I know.
Stereotypes of motorcycle racers.
We now have, I'm just going to count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We've got 17 riders done, interviewed.
Which is quite a high percentage of the grid.
It is quite a high percentage of the grid, yes. And some of them are just awesome. Some of them are so good. Some of them I'm super, super pleased with them. There's no bad ones, which is always a risk, because sometimes you just catch people on a bad day or they're just not that interested in talking to you. But there's none of those. They're all strong enough that I'm happy with them, but some of them are just brilliant. And some of them are a bit ranty and fun and off topic, and the podcast with Alex Marquez is 15 minutes of me and Alex taking the piss out of his brother, essentially.
The Marquez sibling section is fun in that. So, listeners, if you're in the main feed, if you're not a member, you will get loads of these interviews as part of episodes we'll do over the winter as we recap the season, delve a bit deeper into everything that's gone on outside the title battle. If you are in the members club, and we would love to be in the members club because it's good that it's growing, but also we just really enjoy the interaction. It is a lot of fun having you along for the ride with us in a season like this. You'll get all of these in uncut form, stitched together in sort of thematic groups over the winter. We're also going to bang through loads and loads more of your questions. We've also, Sam Smith, our Formula E and other stuff correspondent, has been investigating how Valentino Rossi's been getting on in the World Endurance Championship and is bringing us a bit of insight on that for a special Members Only podcast. And again, we'll pop some of that in the main feed, but if you want all of that stuff in full, uncut, loads of it through the winter when you're pining for MotoGP and you just really want to hear Johann Zarco in your ears and everyone else, Luca Marini being incredibly thoughtful, come join us in the Members Club.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
There was a point towards the end of the main race at Buriram when I was earmarking a podcast section entitled Let's Be Nice About Jack Miller. I think that still stands. Jack Miller was running third until the very tail end of the race when he got overtaken by Pedro Acosta, then Fabio Di Giannantonio. We should talk about Acosta, who stopped crashing long enough to get back on the podium, but let's talk about Miller quickly first. I am probably the second most sympathetic to Jack Miller in this podcast. There's a clear
hierarchy,
top of the podium, hierarchy for like Miller negativity. I still thought, even though it didn't end the podium, this was a really good Miller ride overall. Simon, what are your thoughts about Jack Miller's ride?
It was fairly average in that Jack Miller is a wet weather specialist that you expect to be, when it rained and when Jack had a good start, I thought, well, Jack podium here. And then suddenly he got beaten by the rookie again, which is the story of his year. Obviously, the KTM is very good in the wet because they had 4 bikes in the top 8 for most of the race until an absolutely heartbreaking crash for Augusto Fernandez, who just wants a result, any result, one result, please, before he leaves. But it wasn't to be today. But obviously, the bike works really well in those conditions. And whenever you've got a bike that's working well in wet conditions, Jack Miller should be number 1, and he wasn't. And then that's kind of the story of Jack's year, isn't it?
Yeah, I kind of agree. For what it's worth, I think that's, and I'm not disappointed, but I think he should be a little bit disappointed and a little annoyed. Again, I think it goes back to what I said at the start of the episode. It was a wet race, but it was so wet that in terms of the pecking order, it was basically dry. So Miller managed to switch on the early improvisation, but then still sort of the pace order shook out a little bit. And when that happened, Acosta's just quicker. And he was quicker today. Acosta's also been very impressive in mixed conditions this season. So
yeah,
there's no huge shame in losing to that, but it should be your trump card. Didn't quite come out today. Fifth is still good in a MotoGP race, but it's nothing to yell and shout about. And at this point, I'm just more interested to see as whether he can get himself out of the general funk of his 2024 at Pramac Yamaha. We also should remember that, once he's out of KTM, obviously the development goes away from him entirely. He's not running the new chassis.
True.
That Pedro Acosta and Brad Binder are running. And depending on who you listen to, that's either the biggest thing ever and doesn't matter at all. That's always the case.
This is a completely just off-topic note that I'm throwing in because it's good. It's nice to share. I had breakfast this morning with someone from Yamaha who was telling me that they're gearing up next year for a very big season because Miller and Oliveira at Pramac will get everything that the factory gets as soon as the factory gets it.
Oh, wow.
It will be a KTM-esque 4 of everything please approach where there's full commitment to the satellite team, which is a brand new concept for Yamaha. So
yeah,
good
very
for Miller.
much so. Yeah, great. Yeah, Miller got pictured in the garage straight after the race doing you didn't have audio on it, but just like a massive basically at how that race had ended. In the context of him being out of KTM as well, in the context of how he's performed all season, I was just like, oh, let him have the podium. Come on. For all that he has done in his career. But I'm also thinking that this is kind of... I haven't quite got my head yet. Miller's still going to be in MotoGP next year. I was thinking, get a podium. Then he can just chill out and career be over. Acosta gets back on the podium after a run of non-finishes and a non-start that was caused by a non-finish. Oscar Robledo said, what changed in Acosta's approach this weekend that meant he not only finished but was on the podium? Did anything actually change in his approach, Simon?
Val is shaking his head vigorously, but something absolutely changed in Pedro Acosta's approach this weekend because he crashed out of the sprint race on Saturday, and then he came to us afterwards and he announced that he'd been crashing too much and that he needed to realise that settling for 5th place wasn't a terrible thing because he's a MotoGP rookie and finishing 5th would be good and he should do that more often. And then he went out in the wet conditions for the first time, his first ever wet MotoGP race on Sunday, and promptly forgot everything he'd told us and went to war with Brad Binder and Jack Miller and won, and was just absolutely brutal to them. Like, he was no one raced as hard on Sunday as Pedro Acosta, and I just reminded us all how damn good he is. Like, it was glorious. I don't really think the factory boys knew what was coming past them.
I'm gonna stick up for Miller here. Miller fought back. Wow, that took a lot of corners for Acosta to get that done.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So Simon is being distracted by an amazing noise outside or inside his hotel room, which I believe is
the amazing. So outside my hotel car park is very wet because the rain really come on after the race, and an unnamed MotoGP team who have something to celebrate today may or may not be doing skids and donuts in their hire cars around the hotel car park in the rain because the polished concrete, it's really slippy. And I'm not going to say who that team is, but Pedro Acosta on the podium today. So that's cool.
It's cool. Like a cool unrelated fact, like we love.
Yeah, absolutely cool unrelated.
I want to talk about the other person who passed Jack Miller in the final laps because Fabio Di Gianantonio's 2024 season ended with 4th place before he goes off to have his body put back together. Digia has been mega recently for someone who delayed his surgery, went through a period where we were saying, just stop now because you're not doing yourself any good. You're having a few more tumbles. Don't make this a career spoiler, this injury that you've got. But he seems to be coping. He seems to cope with the pain, not broken himself even more. And he's just come up with some amazing performances in the races, culminating in 4th today.
I genuinely thought that there was a point where there would be 2 Ducatis on the podium every weekend next year and they would both be red, and then there'd be a bit of a dogfight for 3rd. But you know what? There might be a fairly consistent 3rd place lockout next year because DJ on a GP25, if he comes back fully fit and keeps the form he has right now, the kid is looking really strong. It's like the ultimate redemption story. Yeah. I love it because 12 months ago, he didn't have a ride.
Yeah.
12 months ago, he just won a race and didn't have a ride. And to see him end up next year in a factory bike and in a really well-supported, happy team, he has absolutely rewarded Ducati and VR46 for putting the faith in him. It's cool. I like it.
I'm such a bore because ultimately, in 2025, these fourth places at Phillip Island and here, that and a quarter will be 25 cents, as they say. Won't be worth anything. I think he should have gone after under the knife immediately as soon as he got the first inclination as soon as he was medically advised that he needed to do it. I think, they wanted to avoid it, which is fair enough. They wanted to see if they can maybe somehow get by without it. But I also feel that competitive prospects for 2024 did cloud the picture a little bit, just going by the way he has been talking about it. And I don't like that very much. I think there is nothing to be gained this year. Even though, two good races, but they're still fourth. He's won a race before. Fourth will not change his CV. The contract is already in the bag. It's not getting more lucrative as a result of these two fourth places. The bike is not getting better as a result of these two. I don't know. I'm being a...
You're making a wise and valid point that I do see the logic of. I just also have been going, yeah, did you? A little bit recently. Well, yeah, also, I'm generally pro people not messing their bodies up. But I think it's quite... Sometimes in MotoGP, when I'm thinking of Taka Nakagami hanging on to his home race. Was that last year when he really shouldn't have done? So often in MotoGP, you see someone hang on too long and they're not even doing well. It's not like they're performing through the pain. And maybe something about Didier doing well convinced me maybe it wasn't really that bad. But yeah, best wishes for your surgery, Didier. Now, by the time you listen to this podcast, it might be official that it will be Andrea Iannone replacing him on the VR46 bike. Andrea Iannone riding for Valentino Rossi. Didn't see that one coming a couple of weeks ago, even. Simon, you used the phrase redemption arc about Didier coming back from having no ride to having a good season, having a GP25 for next year. Iannone's on a bit of a redemption arc as well. Now, I think we should talk about him today because as a stand-in rider who's not Dani Pedrosa, we're probably not going to notice he's even there for these 2 weekends. But it is Iannone back on the MotoGP bike after everything. If listeners haven't been following his comeback in World Superbikes this year, how's he been getting on? Has he earned this little chance at what I assume will be a final MotoGP cameo?
I mean, the problem is, right, he's earned it, yes. Podium in his first race, one race, had a really decent season, was fighting, actually, amazingly, was fighting with Danilo Petrucci to be the top independent rider most of the season, which is quite funny. The problem is that there's someone else that's more deserving. And that's the bit that I don't like, because World Superbike rookie and former VR46 Academy rider Nicolo Bulliga beat his teammate Alvaro Bautista to finish second in the championship. And he is more deserving of a shot at MotoGP because he's young enough that he could have a career in MotoGP if his shot in MotoGP went well. Iannone is never going to have a career in MotoGP again. And as a result, I wish it was Bulliga on the bike. As much as there is an element of redemption to Iannone that I have a lot of thoughts about, because he remains an unrepentant drug cheat who left the sport in disgrace because of that, but who has also used his time away from the sport. Most motorbike racers, whenever they retire from racing, mature and turn into actually nice people that they're not whenever they're competing. And he's used his 4 years away to do that and has come back into the World Superbike paddock as a totally different character. And everyone that interacts with him says, oh my God, that's not the same guy that we knew in MotoGP. And they don't just say that because of the extensive cosmetic surgery he's had to look totally different. It's a totally... The guy missed his first MotoGP test for a manufacturer because of his facelift getting infected. That's a fair criticism. I'm allowed to make that comment about his plastic surgery, okay?
Yeah, listeners, Val basically fell off his chair at that point, even more than he did when shaking his head so vigorously a little while ago. I can't even remember what you're shaking your head vigorously about. Val's quite a physically tiring podcast.
Pedro's change of mindset. There's I as someone that has been one of the biggest critics of Iannone and what he did, I'm not sad to see him back. I actually think the only reason that I'm a little bit apprehensive about it is the fact that I'd rather see Bull again. I think he's more deserving. But, at least Iannone gets to come back and have his 2 final MotoGP races that never were. It's quite funny that one of them is at Sepang. I really hope he wears a helmet for the weekend that says I'm a vegan now or something along those lines. And then he can go back to Superbikes and we can all be happy that he got to say goodbye to MotoGP.
Before Val gives his take on this, I love how many new or newish to MotoGP listeners we have on this podcast and in the members club. So to kind of shortcut the story there, when Andrea Iannone did have his doping ban, part of his defence was the suggestion that it came from contaminated beef, which he
his only defence was that it came from contaminated beef he had in Malaysia.
Yeah, so that is the irony of the Sepang return and his menu for the weekend. Yeah, could be interesting to see. Val, your take on Iannone's comeback and your thoughts on Bullaga as well.
Well, yeah, apart from the fact that I feel like I genuinely have no thoughts on the doping thing. It's wild. I have nothing. I've reached into my brain and I have come up empty. However, I agree that it would have been cool to see Nicola Bullaga. I think ultimately the difference is either somebody with a ton of MotoGP starts returns and finishes 17th, or somebody with no MotoGP starts shows up for the first time, gets a MotoGP, like whatever happens, you would have been a MotoGP rider that day, and you finishes 17th, whatever, who cares? There was a suggestion in Italian media that Bullaga would have liked a test before, so for him it would have been serious enough to where it's not just, a reward type of situation. You have to take it seriously. Whereas for Iannone, it's, you just come back for a bit, and there's no talk of anything full time coming out of it.
This is yet another argument for why MotoGP should do what F1 does and have a rookies test.
Yeah, at some point
we should have a day that all these kids can ride a bike at some point in the season.
At some point in the winter, we're going to rant about this for ages because I cannot understand. Well, and there's a few F1 parallels I want to bring in that actually put F1 in quite a good light, which we don't often do on this podcast, in fairness. But yeah, it's crazy that MotoGP doesn't take bringing its next generation through. That they are not all going to be Pedro Acosta, who you can just throw at a bike and it'll be brilliant. You're going to miss people. You won't just stumble over people like what you did with Quartararo.
Or some of them will be Fabio Quartararos, who you throw at the bike and they are brilliant, but you don't know it because you can't throw them at the bike.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Iannone, it's the redemption arc on both the doping ban thing. I wish he'd been a bit more like, at some point in this process during this time away, have gone, yeah, I screwed up there, I shouldn't have done. I am really pleased he's come back a different character. I really, really rated Iannone as a rider and loved having him around in MotoGP. There weren't many people in that Moto2 era who you looked at and thought they might actually be as raw fast as Marc Marquez on the right day in terms of just sheer pace. None of the rest of the package, but in terms of this guy is crazy fast and capable of mad, brilliant moves. He let himself down a lot in MotoGP, not just with the doping ban, but performances beforehand, decisions he made and stuff. He didn't let himself have the career he could have done on his pure ability. And there's no kind of, I'm not saying that him getting the chance to finish 17th maybe on a VR46 Ducati is like, phew, he's come full circle, he'll get the send-off he deserved on ability terms. But a part of me is also pleased to have a degree of happy ending to the Iannone MotoGP story, because as a kid he was so exciting to have around, and he should have let himself do a better job.
And the positive thing is that coming back to MotoGP on a GP23 probably gives him a fair chance of matching his performances from riding a 2019 Aprilia RSGP.
It's not inaccurate. Harsh, but not inaccurate.
Yeah. I mean, the GP23 is probably going to finish the race, which is more could be said for the RSGP of the time.
There was a suggestion.
Or today.
There was a suggestion like a week ago maybe, and I don't know if that still holds true, that it would be Iannone for Sepang but someone else for Valencia. And I don't know if that's true, but if that's how it turns out, and the someone else is of course Ducati tester Michele Biro, who has not yet got to race in MotoGP this season because obviously Ducati has been sapped of any wildcards by Class A status, and obviously Ducati's been really, really suffering without those wildcards. Anyway, just would be cool to see Biro. I mean, no novelty in that, but just
to complete the set, yeah. When was the last year without a Michele
it's ridiculous. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to check when he last didn't turn up. Give me two seconds.
Me too. I'm literally just checking it right now. Michele Pirro hasn't been a full-time Grand Prix rider since 2012.
Yes, he has.
But has rode in every season since.
Yeah.
He's 38 now.
It's amazing.
Yeah, fine. Finally, to end the episode, a question from Margaret Patterson, who sounds like she cares about the welfare of people in MotoGP. How much of an effect will having 3 races in a row have on the paddock personnel? Do they get sick? Are there subs brought in to relieve the pressure? Or are there any measures in place at all to help? Simon, I sometimes give you easier deadlines. Can you cope with being here for a 3rd week in a row at Sepang? A genuine question, how is everyone in the paddock doing as we're getting to the end of this very long season?
7th week in a row. Because most of the paddock have done, well, I mean, everyone has either done a triple header, 1 week off, but not at home, and then another triple header, or they've done 1 week, 3 races, flown all the way from Asia to Europe, and then all the way from Europe to Australia, and are still dying of jet lag as a result. So it's weird in the paddock at the minute. People that are normally very good friends with each other are at each other's throats and ready to murder them. And people that normally don't like each other are best friends this weekend. Because everyone's like, brain chemistry is a bit melted by the temperature and the jet lag and the travel. Coming here from Australia has actually really, like, no one slept well, which is quite odd because it's only a 4-hour time difference as opposed to like the 8 or 9 hours that we're quite regularly used to. But it seems to have really messed up everyone's sleep patterns coming here. This has been the hardest thing that MotoGP has ever done as a championship, this block. There's a reason why the teams basically said we cannot do triple headers next year. Part of it has been doing a triple header that started in Europe, went to Asia and finished at Motegi, which is the most physically demanding circuit of the year because there's an hour's drive each way every day to get to and from your hotel. So it automatically adds 2 hours to the day and it's horrible. Everyone is exhausted. Like, everyone is exhausted. People are sick. I spoke to a team today who lost one of their team members because he's been sent back to Europe by the medical center because of some sort of a respiratory problem he picked up. A Moto3 rider lost their crew chief last weekend because he ended up in hospital and the team boss had to step in and crew chief for him. There's just the usual, everyone's not well. Everyone is like, it's quite funny. You get to so our hotel. A lot of the paddock are staying in my hotel, and you go down for breakfast in the morning, and you know everyone in the restaurant, and they have a stand full of bottles of water, and everyone that walks in grabs a bottle of water, sits down at their table, and puts a Baraka tablet into it because everyone's trying to pump themselves full of vitamins to stay healthy at the minute. It's horrific. I've kind of got what I think was a chest infection and then pumped myself full of antibiotics and solved it. Everyone has been sick at least some point. I hate it. I want to go home. Please send help.
1 more week to go and then at least back to Europe. This is nearly over. I have to say, you've been perkier on this podcast than on the post-race one with me for a little while. I think the Barocca is
over-caffeinated.
Well and truly kicked in. Okay, it's worked. Listeners, we'll get 1 more week out of Simon on this time, and me and Val on this time zone before everyone takes a quick breath. Thank you for your questions, Members Club. Thank you for your company. Keep an eye on the Race MotoGP YouTube channel where these two will be debating in a sleepless state something else that we'll decide in a minute this week. Check out what's there already as well. You can see us confidently declaring Marc Marquez's overwhelming 2025 title favourite in the sort of prediction that may or may not come back to bite us quite a lot next season. We'll be back in your ears after the Malaysian Grand Prix next weekend.
The Athletic.